There are people who walk into a room and something shifts, not because they demand attention, but because they carry something undeniable, a light, a presence, an energy that makes others feel both drawn and threatened at the same time. You might be one of them, and if you are, you already know the weight of what I'm about to say, because here's what nobody tells you about being exceptional. Here's what they don't warn you about when you develop your gifts, sharpen your mind, cultivate your spirit. The brighter you shine, the darker the shadows you cast on those around you. And in those shadows, something dangerous begins to grow. Thomas Merton understood this, a man who sought God in silence, who withdrew from the world to find truth, who became luminous precisely because he stopped trying to be seen. He knew that the spiritual life, the examined life, the life of depth and meaning, it comes with a price, and that price is often paid in the currency of human connection. You see, when you outshine everyone around you, you don't just illuminate the path forward. You also reveal, without intending to, how lost everyone else has been. Your clarity becomes a mirror. Your growth becomes a measurement. Your peace becomes an indictment of their chaos. And people don't thank you for that. They resent you for it. Let me be clear about what I mean by outshining. I'm not talking about arrogance. I'm not talking about those who parade their achievements like trophies, who speak loudly about their success, who need everyone to know how special they are. That's not light, that's noise. And noise eventually fades into the background. I'm talking about something quieter, more dangerous. I'm talking about the person who has done the inner work. The one who has faced their shadows and integrated them. The one who speaks with wisdom, not because they read it in a book, but because they've lived it in the fire of their own transformation. The one who doesn't need to prove anything, and that's precisely what makes them undeniable. When you become that person, something strange happens. You start to notice the distance. Friends who used to call stop calling. Conversations that used to flow become strained. People who once shared everything with you now share nothing at all. And you wonder if you've done something wrong. You wonder if you've become proud, if you've changed in some terrible way. But the truth is simpler and more painful than that. You haven't become worse, you've become more. And for many people that's unbearable to witness. Because here's what happens in the human psyche when confronted with someone who has transcended their level of consciousness. There's a moment, a flash, where they see the possibility. They see that growth is real, that change is possible, that they too could become more than what they are. And in that moment, they have a choice. They can be inspired, or they can be threatened. Most choose threat, not consciously, not maliciously. But the ego, that guardian of the familiar, recognizes danger when it sees it. And you, luminous, transformed, free, you are dangerous to everyone who has made peace with their cage. Merton wrote about this paradox. He spoke of how the contemplative, the one who has found union with the divine, becomes simultaneously the most connected and the most alone. Connected to everything through understanding, alone because so few can meet them at that altitude. He knew that enlightenment doesn't make you popular. It makes you strange. It makes you other. It makes you someone people admire from a distance, but rarely invite close. And this is where the danger deepens. Because when you realize that your light creates loneliness, you face a terrible temptation. The temptation to dim yourself, to make yourself smaller, less radiant, more palatable, to hide your wisdom behind jokes, to diminish your growth with self-deprecation, to pretend you haven't seen what you've seen, learned what you've learned, become who you've become. I've watched brilliant people do this. I've watched souls who had touched something transcendent deliberately dull their own shine to keep others comfortable. They stop sharing their insights. They stop speaking their truth. They learn to laugh at things that aren't funny and agree with perspectives they know are limited, all in the desperate hope of belonging. And piece by piece they extinguish themselves, not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually, like a candle being smothered by a hand that claims to protect it. They trade their luminosity for acceptance. And what they discover, too late, is that the acceptance they receive is not for who they are, it's for who they've agreed to stop being. This is the first danger of outshining everyone around you. Not that others will reject you, but that you will reject yourself to avoid their rejection. But there's a second danger, equally insidious. and it emerges not from your dimming, but from your defiance. It happens when you decide, consciously or unconsciously, that if people can't handle your light, that's their problem. When you begin to wear your exceptionalism like armor. When your spiritual growth becomes spiritual pride. Merton warned against this too. He saw how easily the contemplative life could become another form of ego inflation. How the person who has transcended ordinary consciousness could develop an extraordinary arrogance. Not the loud kind, the subtle kind. The kind that looks like humility but feels like judgment. The kind that says, I understand things you could never comprehend. I've seen depths you'll never reach. I've become what you're too afraid to pursue. This is the shadow side of enlightenment, the narcissism of the awakened. And it's perhaps more dangerous than remaining asleep, because it wraps itself in the language of wisdom, while perpetuating the very separation that wisdom is meant to dissolve. When you outshine others from this place, you're no longer a light, you're a spotlight. And spotlights don't illuminate, they expose, they interrogate, they create harsh distinctions between what's seen and what remains in darkness. People feel this. They feel the judgment beneath your serenity. They feel the superiority inside your spiritual language, and they turn away, not because your light is too bright, but because it's too cold. I once knew someone who had done extraordinary inner work. Years of therapy, meditation, plant medicine, shadow integration. They had genuinely changed, the anger dissolved, the anxiety quieted. They found something real. But somewhere along the way, they began dividing the world, those doing the work and those who weren't. Conscious versus asleep. Understanding versus trapped in illusion. Every conversation became teaching, every interaction a demonstration of their evolution. They spoke of compassion constantly, but had none for anyone struggling with what they'd overcome. Their light didn't warm, it burned. Eventually they found themselves alone, surrounded by admirers from a distance, but loved not at all. Brilliant and isolated, awakened and disconnected, luminous and unloved. This is the paradox Merton understood so deeply. That true enlightenment doesn't separate you from humanity. It connects you more deeply to it. That wisdom doesn't make you superior, it makes you more tender. That seeing clearly doesn't mean looking down, it means looking with the eyes of someone who remembers what it was like to be lost. Because you were lost once, before the books, before the practices, before the revelations that changed everything. You too stumbled in the dark. You too lived in patterns you couldn't break and believed stories that kept you small. You too hurt people without meaning to, and hurt yourself without knowing how to stop. And if you've forgotten that, if your growth has erased your memory of your own struggle, then your light is not enlightenment, it's forgetfulness. And there's nothing dangerous about forgetfulness except to the person who mistakes it for wisdom. So what do you do? How do you navigate this terrain? How do you honor your growth without diminishing it, share your light without weaponizing it, stand in your truth without standing above? Merton offered an answer, though not easy. The way forward is not to shine less, but differently. Not with light that says, look at me, but look at this. Not as the source, but as reflection. Not as someone who has arrived, but someone still walking, just steps ahead. This is the art of hidden holiness, wisdom that doesn't announce itself, growth that doesn't need validation, presence that influences through being, not words. The person who has become extraordinary but lives ordinarily, who touched transcendence but remains grounded, who sees with clarity but speaks with gentleness. These are people who change the world without the world knowing their names. Teachers who inspire without trying to teach. Healers who transform without claiming to heal. Lights who illuminate not by standing center stage, but by quietly making the whole room brighter. The sun versus a spotlight. The sun doesn't choose who receives warmth. It rises, and everything benefits according to its nature. The flower opens. The seed germinates. Each receives what it needs without the sun diminishing or discriminating. But a spotlight selects. It focuses. Says, this matters, that doesn't. While spotlights have their place, they're terrible guides for living. Life isn't a stage. People around you aren't an audience. When you've done deep work, grown beyond your environment's consciousness, you face a choice. Will you be the sun or the spotlight? Will you shine indiscriminately, offering warmth to whoever seeks it, or selectively illuminating only those deemed worthy? This choice determines everything, whether growth isolates or connects, whether wisdom builds bridges or walls, whether light attracts or repels. People who outshine without creating resentment don't hide their light. They don't broadcast it loudly either. They live it so quietly, so naturally, so completely, that others can't help but wonder what they've found. They don't speak much about spiritual practices, but there's peace in them that makes everyone curious. They don't advertise growth, but there's stability that makes everyone feel safer. They don't proclaim wisdom, but there's presence that makes everyone slow down and pay attention. These people understand something crucial. Becoming luminous isn't about outshining anyone. It's about helping others find their own light. Growth isn't to surpass others, but illuminate the path so they can walk it too. Wisdom isn't a possession to display, but a gift to share. Carefully, lovingly, only when truly welcomed. Merton spent years in silence, years in solitude, years in deep contemplation. And what did he do with all that wisdom? He wrote, simply, beautifully, humbly. He shared what he'd learned not as someone above, but as someone beside. He spoke to seekers as a fellow seeker. He addressed the lost as someone who remembered being lost. He touched the suffering as someone who had known suffering intimately. His words carried weight, not because he claimed authority, but because he claimed kinship. He outshone many of his contemporaries not by standing taller, but by kneeling deeper. His light was so powerful because it was so human, so accessible, so honest about the struggle. This is what gets forgotten in spiritual communities, in personal development circles, in any space where growth is the goal. We forget that the heroes of transformation are not those who never struggled. They're those who struggled and learned to embrace the struggle as part of the journey. They're not those who transcended humanity. They're those who became more fully human. And when you understand this, when you really let it penetrate, something releases. The pressure to be perfect releases. The need to prove your evolution releases. The fear of being too much or not enough releases. You stop trying to outshine anyone because you're no longer in competition. You stop dimming yourself because you're no longer afraid. You simply become who you are fully, without apology or explanation. And strangely, paradoxically, this is when you become most radiant, not when you're trying to shine, but when you've forgotten to monitor your brightness, not when you're performing your growth, but when you're simply being the person your growth has revealed you to be. I remember a conversation with someone who said to me, "I feel guilty for being happy. Most of my friends are struggling, and here I am, having worked through my stuff, feeling genuinely good. I don't know how to be around them anymore without feeling like I'm rubbing it in their faces." And I understood that guilt. I understood that fear. But here's what I told them and what I want to say to you if you're carrying that same weight. Your happiness is not an insult to their struggle. Your peace is not a judgment on their chaos. Your growth is not a condemnation of their stagnation. You don't honor their difficulty by pretending to be more broken than you are. You don't serve their journey by hiding how far you've traveled on yours. What you do, what you must do, is live so fully in your own truth that it becomes an invitation. Not a demand, not a requirement, but an invitation, a quiet demonstration that says, without words, here's what's possible. Here's what happens when you face yourself honestly. Here's what waits on the other side of the work you're afraid to do. Some will accept that invitation. They'll ask you questions. They'll want to know how you got there. They'll be genuinely curious about your practices, your insights, your journey. And to them you share freely. Not as a guru, not as someone who has all the answers, but as someone who has walked a path and found it worthwhile. Others will reject that invitation. They'll criticize your peace as spiritual bypassing. They'll dismiss your growth as privilege. They'll find reasons why your path won't work for them, why your transformation isn't real, why your light is actually darkness in disguise. And to them, you offer compassion, not agreement, not argument, just compassion. Because their resistance isn't really about you, it's about their own fear of change, their own attachment to familiar suffering, their own journey that hasn't yet reached the point where growth feels more appealing than comfort. You can't drag people toward the light. You can't argue them into awakening. You can't shame them into growth. All you can do is stand in your own truth and trust that whoever needs to find it will find it, and whoever isn't ready won't. And both of those outcomes are okay. This is the hardest lesson of all, the lesson of surrender, the lesson of accepting that your light is not for everyone, that your wisdom won't resonate with everyone, that your presence will disturb some people no matter how gentle you are, how humble you try to be, how carefully you navigate the space between dimming and dazzling. Some people are meant to walk beside you, others are meant to walk away. And your job is not to chase the ones who leave or to cling desperately to the ones who stay. Your job is simply to keep walking, to keep growing, to keep becoming more of who you truly are, and to trust that the right companions will match your pace at the right time. Merton died relatively young, 53 years old, electrocuted by a faulty fan in Bangkok while attending an interfaith conference. He had spent decades in silence, decades in solitude, decades cultivating a light so bright it eventually drew the whole world to his monastery door. People from every tradition, every background, every level of spiritual development came seeking his wisdom, and what's remarkable is that he welcomed them all. The beginners and the advanced, the skeptics and the devout, the broken and the whole. He didn't require them to be at his level to receive his attention. He didn't demand they prove their worthiness to access his insights. He simply offered what he had found, that beneath all our differences, all our struggles, all our varied paths, there is a unifying presence, a divine ground, a love that holds everything. His final words, in his final talk, hours before his death, were about communication, about how the deepest understanding happens not through words but through communion, how the greatest teaching happens not through explanation but through presence, how the most powerful light is the one that asks nothing of you except that you let yourself be illuminated. This is what it means to outshine without danger, to be so grounded in your own light that it becomes not a weapon or a burden, but a gift, not something that separates but something that connects, not something that elevates you above others, but something that reveals what's possible for all. And yes, there will still be loneliness sometimes, because consciousness at any level beyond the collective always carries a degree of solitude. There will still be misunderstanding, because words can never fully capture what you've experienced. There will still be distance between you and those who haven't walked the path you've walked, but that distance doesn't have to be hostile. That solitude doesn't have to be bitter. That misunderstanding doesn't have to be permanent. Because you know something now that you didn't know before. You know that the light you carry isn't yours to possess. It's yours to share. Not by forcing it on anyone, but by living in such alignment with it that others can't help but wonder what you've found. There's a story about a student who came to a master and said, "I want to be enlightened. Teach me everything you know." And the master said, "I will teach you nothing, but if you stay, you may learn everything." The student didn't understand. He stayed anyway. And over years, not through lessons but through presence, not through words but through observation, not through teaching but through being, he absorbed what the master had found. Not because the master gave it to him, but because he became receptive enough to receive it. This is the way forward. Not teaching, being, not explaining, living, not showcasing your light, embodying it so completely that it becomes indistinguishable from who you are. And when you do this, when you stop performing your growth and start inhabiting it, something miraculous happens. The people who were threatened by you suddenly feel safe. The people who resented you suddenly feel curious. The distance that seemed permanent suddenly begins to close. Not because you changed, but because you stopped trying to be anything other than exactly what you've become. The danger of outshining everyone around you is real, but it's not inevitable. It's not the light that's dangerous, it's how you carry it. It's whether you wield it like a sword or offer it like a candle. It's whether you use it to expose or to illuminate. It's whether you stand in it alone or invite others to step into its warmth. Merton found the answer in paradox, in being utterly unique and completely universal, in being deeply himself and profoundly connected to all. in being extraordinary in his ordinariness, transcendent in his humanity, exceptional in his humility. You can find that too, not by becoming more than you are or less than you are, but by becoming exactly what you are, without apology or exaggeration, by shining not to prove anything, not to achieve anything, not to surpass anyone, but simply because that's what light does. It shines, not to compete with darkness, not to shame the shadows, but because shining is its nature. And in the end, that's all any of us can do. Become so fully ourselves that our very existence becomes an invitation for others to do the same. Grow so deeply that our roots reach the same source everyone's roots are reaching for. Shine so authentically that our light doesn't create separation but reveals the connection that was always there. The danger of outshining everyone around you isn't that you'll be too bright. It's that you'll forget why you started seeking light in the first place. Not to rise above anyone, but to see more clearly. Not to surpass anyone, but to understand more deeply. Not to become superior, but to become free. And when you remember that, when you really, truly remember that, the danger dissolves. The resentment fades. The loneliness transforms into solitude that nourishes rather than depletes. And you discover what Merton discovered in his monastery, in his silence, in his years of walking toward truth. That the brightest light is the one that helps others find their own way. That the greatest wisdom is remembering we're all students. That the highest consciousness is recognizing the divine in everyone, even those who haven't recognized it in themselves yet. This is the path. Not easy, not comfortable, not guaranteed to make you popular or successful or understood, but true, deeply, radically, unshakably true. But let me go deeper into what this actually looks like in practice. Because philosophical truths are beautiful, but they're useless if they can't be lived. And living this truth, navigating the reality of being luminous in a world that often prefers darkness, requires more than understanding. It requires a kind of vigilance, a kind of gentleness with yourself and others, a kind of wisdom that only comes from repeatedly failing and beginning again. You'll face moments when dimming yourself feels like kindness, when someone you love is struggling and your own stability feels like a reproach to their chaos, when sharing your joy feels like cruelty in the face of their sorrow, when speaking your truth feels like violence against their carefully constructed illusions. And in those moments, you'll want to make yourself smaller. You'll want to hide your light under a bushel, as the old saying goes, to make others comfortable. And sometimes that is kindness. Sometimes discretion is wisdom. Sometimes silence is compassion. But you must learn to distinguish between healthy humility and toxic self-abandonment, between appropriate restraint and self-betrayal, between honoring someone's journey and enabling their stagnation. The question is not, should I shine, but how do I shine honoring both my truth and their readiness? The answer is always, with presence, not prescription, with being, not preaching, with invitation, not insistence. When I'm with someone threatened by my peace, I don't shrink, but I don't expand either. I meet them where they are. I ask questions instead of offering answers. I listen instead of teaching. I create space for their experience. And often something remarkable happens. They relax, the defensiveness softens. In that softening, they become curious, not about what I know, but about what I've experienced. This is the difference between evangelizing and emanating. Evangelizing says, I have truth, you need it. Emanating says, I've found something that works for me. Evangelizing creates resistance. Emanating creates receptivity. Merton's writings never demand. They invite. He shares discoveries not as someone with final answers, but as someone in love with the questions. Because of that, millions have found wisdom in his words. You can do this too. In your family, workplace, friendships. In every interaction where your growth has created uncomfortable space, you can choose how that space feels, like a gap that separates, or a bridge that connects. Here's what I've discovered. Other people's reactions aren't within your control. Whether they're inspired or threatened, that's their journey. But how you show up, how you hold your light, that's entirely yours. This is where real power lives. Not in becoming so bright no one can look away, but in becoming so steady everyone feels safe to look, not forcing light into dark corners, but illuminating the room so gently people forget they were afraid. The difference between noon sun and dawn sun, both same light, same power. But noon sun exposes harshly, revealing every flaw. Dawn sun is gentle, gradual, allowing eyes to adjust. Which sun do we write poems about? Which feels sacred? Your growth can be noon sun or dawn sun. The choice is yours. There's another dimension rarely discussed. The loneliness of growth isn't just about others not understanding you. It's about outgrowing versions of yourself that others loved. Becoming someone your old friends don't recognize. Someone your family doesn't know how to relate to anymore. This is perhaps the most disorienting aspect of transformation. You don't just change thoughts or habits. You change your entire frequency. Not everyone can or wants to match it. They liked the old you. The you who struggled with them, complained with them, stayed stuck with them. That you was familiar, safe, required nothing except remaining the same. This new you is terrifying. Your existence poses a question they're not ready to answer. If you can change, what does my refusal to change mean? Your growth holds up a mirror. Not everyone wants to see their reflection. Not because they don't love you, but because your transformation confronts them with their own potential. And potential is heavy. The weight of responsibility, possibility, knowing you could be more, but choosing to remain less. So they create distance. Your new interests become pretentious, your perspectives naive, your peace performative. They need you to be wrong about your growth so they can be right about their stagnation. This is when you need Merton's wisdom most. Solitude is not loneliness. Being alone is not abandonment. The emptying of your life makes space for something deeper, more aligned with who you've become. When old relationships fall away, there's a void. A terrifying void. You'll be tempted to believe something's wrong with you, that your growth cost everything, that awakening means permanent isolation. But if you sit in that void without filling it prematurely, without rushing back to old patterns, without dimming yourself to attract back those who left, something miraculous emerges. New connections find you. People who match your frequency, who celebrate your growth, who aren't threatened by your light. Not immediately. The void between old and new can last longer than you'd like, but it happens. Consciousness seeks consciousness. Light finds light. Merton trusted this. At 26, entering the monastery meant leaving friends, possibilities, an entire life. There was grief, loss, but also liberation. He stopped trying to be everything to everyone and became fully himself. In becoming fully himself, he became available to the whole world. The paradox: the more specifically yourself you become, the more universally relevant. The more you honor your unique path, the more you illuminate the path for others. This only works if done with love. If growth comes from genuine truth-seeking rather than rebellion. If transformation roots in self-discovery rather than self-righteousness. The shadow side, and there is always shadow, is spiritual superiority disguised as maturity. The person who uses growth as a weapon wields consciousness like a sword. You've met them. Maybe you've been them. I have. They speak compassion but show none. Talk oneness but create hierarchy. Claim transcended ego but are controlled by it in subtler ways. Their light scorches instead of warms. This happens when you confuse transformation with transcendence, when you think inner work makes you above human messiness. Real enlightenment makes you more human, not less, more tender, not harder, more humble, not proud. The way through. Remember where you came from, who you were before practices, insights, breakthroughs. Remember the lost, scared, confused, stuck version. Let that memory generate genuine compassion for everyone still there. The person struggling with addiction, you were them once in some form. The person trapped in toxic relationships, you were them. The person numbing pain with work, shopping, scrolling, you were them. Maybe not identically, but in the fundamental human experience of seeking relief from suffering in places that only create more. And if you can hold that remembering, if you can let it soften you rather than harden you, if you can approach everyone you meet as a former version of yourself who hasn't yet found what you found, then your light becomes medicine rather than measurement. Your growth becomes inspiration rather than intimidation. Your presence becomes healing rather than harmful. This is what Merton understood as true compassion. Not pity from above, but kinship from within. Not I feel sorry for you, but I remember being you. Not saving, but accompanying. When you outshine others from this place, the danger dissolves. You're not trying to outshine anyone. You're simply walking your path with integrity, and the light that emerges is a byproduct, not a goal. People can feel the difference between authentic transformation and performed enlightenment. The body knows, the soul knows, and when they sense that authenticity, something in them relaxes. The defenses lower, the comparison quiets. They think, perhaps unconsciously, if this person can find peace, maybe I can too. This is what your light can do when held properly, when offered freely, when embodied fully. The danger of outshining everyone around you is not inevitable. It's a choice made in small moments over and over. The choice to be humble or proud, gentle or harsh, human or superhuman. Choose humanity, not because it makes you popular, but because it makes you real. And reality is what this world is starving for. Be the light that remembers it once needed light. Be the growth that stays rooted while reaching. Be the consciousness that never forgets its kinship with everyone still learning to see. One person living truth changes everything. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. The way dawn changes night, without force, without announcement. Just inevitable, irresistible light, revealing what was always there, waiting to be seen.